As many of you know, we recently bought our WT9 Dynamic with one goal in mind, to finally explore more of continental Europe in our own aircraft. However, winter has had other ideas. Short days, high winds and waterlogged runways mean very little actual flying for us, which makes this the perfect time to start planning next season's big adventures. Having never flown in continental Europe until the day I collected our WT9 from Slovakia, I found the prospect quite intimidating. So I posted a video asking for advice, and in that video I mentioned something that I had discovered whilst preparing for the journey, which was that flying a UK registered 600 kilogram microlight across Europe isn't as simple as it may once have been. Immediately on posting the video, the trolls pushed back. One particular comment caught my attention. A viewer wrote the following:
"Why are you slagging off Brexit and blaming it for your imagined problems? Effectively, very little has changed since we were never within the Schengen area anyway. As long as you leave the EU with customs and immigration dealt with, just submit a flight plan and a GAR and land at any approved landing site in the UK. You are overthinking this whole thing and mindlessly blaming a decision made nearly 10 years ago that you clearly didn't like. Get over it."
Such a passionate response suggests that there are some out there who are unaware of or who do not fully appreciate the additional regulations and challenges faced by pilots of UK registered 600 kilogram microlights flying to continental Europe. So in this video I'm going to give you a complete breakdown on how to avoid getting yourself into a world of trouble if in the future you're planning to fly your microlight into Europe. Despite the existence of the European Union, Europe is not actually a single unified playground for microlights. Each country has its own definitions of a microlight, or ULM, limits on maximum takeoff weight and engine power, overflight permission rules, procedures for customs and immigration, and requirements for pilots and aircraft documents. If you get this right, you'll have an incredible and stress-free touring experience. If you get it wrong, you may run into life-changing fines, issues with your insurance provider, unwanted attention from local authorities, denial of access into airspace or airfields, and/or potentially serious legal action. When I was planning the flight back from collecting our WT9 in Slovakia, I realised I would be passing through multiple countries and have to face a range of rules and expectations. With absolutely no experience of the processes involved and no one I could find to ask, my head was spinning with questions. Who do I need to notify of my intentions? Do I need to depart from a specific airfield? How do I deal with flight plans? Do flight plans allow me to transit airspaces? What are the customs requirements?
What documents and equipment must I carry? Do I need to speak a different language to air traffic control? Where can I get Mogas? Have you put the bins out? Why did you leave the lights on upstairs? Did you leave popcorn crumbs on the kitchen surface? Why are your dirty plates in the sink when the dishwasher is just there?
There is a great deal to be said from learning from the experience of others. So I started my research by watching videos made by some UK-based aviation YouTubers. I watched 3 videos by Joe Del Flyer. Thanks, Tim. I watched a video by The Flying Reporter. Thanks, John. I watched a video by Shortfield. Thanks, Terry. I watched a very detailed video by Flyer. It was very detailed. I then turned to the websites of the regulatory bodies on both sides of the channel. There was a huge amount of information to absorb, and it quickly became clear that a trip like this may only feel easy once you've already done it. When it comes to flying a microlight from the UK into continental Europe, there are 5 possible routes available, and your choice will depend upon your appetite for risk and your level of thalassophobia. You can route through the airspaces of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, or Norway. Sam, who bought our Eurofox Golf Charlie Oscar Charlie Golf from us, recently proved how capable such a microlight aircraft can be. He flew his Eurofox from Dundee in Scotland 430 miles over the North Sea to Kristiansand in Norway. Just incredible. And a reminder that the Norwegian route is technically possible, although in my opinion you need some pretty big stones to even consider it. But regardless of which route you take, there are some common requirements for entering any European country and a UK registered microlight. And from my own experience, having your documentation organised properly makes the entire process significantly easier and far less stressful when dealing with customs, immigration and/or aviation authorities. So what documents do you need to take with you to Europe? I made 2 folders for my European trip. I have one folder containing all the documents relating to the aircraft and the other relating to the aircraft's occupants. The greatest compliment I received came from the German border officials. Within minutes of presenting them with these 2 folders, they stamped our passports and waved us through without even saying a single word or showing the slightest flicker of emotion. Eve, my German wife, would have been proud. As you can see, the first page of the folders has a list of contents. This allows the relevant paperwork to be accessed efficiently. In my aircraft documents folder, I have the following items: a certificate of aircraft registration, the current permit to fly, the CAP 1574 document, which effectively confirms the CAA's position on microlight flights aboard, insurance certificates for the aircraft and the policy documents, an Ofcom certificate confirming registration of my broadcast equipment, radio transceiver installation certificate, transponder installation certificate, the pilot operating handbook and a current weight and balance report. A noise certificate, or for microlights with the Rotex engine, a CAP 1502 exemption document. I also have a list of installed equipment with their serial numbers, a copy of the VAT receipt for the aircraft and hard copies of any overflight permissions if that's applicable. In my flight documents folder, I have the following items: my original passport with an A4 colour copy, my original driving licence with an A4 colour copy, my global health insurance card, health and travel insurance documents, my pilot's licence, flight radio telephony operator's licence, my pilot medical declaration and certificate, a CAP 2086 EU medical equivalency document, templates of the flight plan and GAR forms, a copy of the CIRA interception procedures, and the CAA's 20C leaflet on VFR flight plans. And finally, hard copies of the airfield information for any of my intended or alternate destinations. I would argue that this list isn't exhaustive. In fact, it really represents the minimum requirement. On top of that, I keep PDF copies of every single document I've mentioned in this video stored in a password-protected folder in the cloud. It's a simple precaution, but if anything gets lost, damaged or forgotten whilst I'm abroad, having instant access to the details may save a huge amount of time and stress. By far the most useful resource for information on flying to Europe has got to be the Flying Abroad section of the information library on the BMAA website, and secondly the referenced European Microlight Federation document. This provides information on the national requirements with links to governing bodies and sources of further information and contacts. When planning your flight abroad, you should study these resources very carefully as they are regularly updated and will provide much more information than is within the scope of this video to provide. Before we dive into the additional steps required specifically for pilots of UK registered 600 kg microlight aircraft, let's look at the 2 common processes every pilot needs to complete when flying from the UK into Europe. As that commenter was keen to highlight, these are to submit a General Aviation Report or GAR form and also file a flight plan. A General Aviation Report form is a notification provided to the Border Force and His Majesty's Revenue and Customs HMRC regarding the flight and persons on board. There are some important points regarding submitting a GAR form. You will need to create a gov.uk 1 login, set up an online account, complete the form with specific details of the aircraft, flight and those on board. Submit the GAR form online up to 48 hours prior to departure but not less than 2 hours before. The GAR form is very detailed, so I strongly recommend having all of your aircraft documents and all forms of identification for everyone on board to hand. If you don't, you'll very quickly find yourself frustrated. The website also lists which airfields are approved for UK departures and arrivals, so it's worth checking that information in advance. You can create a draft GAR form and save it, and this is something that I'd strongly encourage you to do. Complete every section ahead of time and then save the draft. The night or even a few hours before departure, all you then need to do is to review the details, make any final adjustments and then submit the form. Trust me, when you're carrying out all of your pre-flight checks, packing the aircraft, reviewing the weather and trying to squeeze out your last pee, you won't have the time or mental bandwidth to be able to complete a GAR form from scratch. Ask me how I know. Filing a flight plan is far less demanding than completing a GAR form, especially if you're using SkyDemon for both your route planning and flight submission. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of SkyDemon. The first thing you should do is register with the Assisted Flight Plan Exchange, or AFPEx. You can do this through the nats.aero website. They will issue you with a username and password. It can sometimes take a few weeks to complete this process, so once again, don't leave this until the last minute. I carry a hard copy of the registration letter in my flights documents folder for reference. AFPEx is directly linked to SkyDemon. There are a few things that you should keep in mind before planning a route and filing a flight plan using SkyDemon. Firstly, make sure that you've completed every field in the aircraft description section of SkyDemon. This includes listing all of your communication and navigation equipment, along with life-saving equipment you carry, such as emergency locator beacons, life jackets, and/or a raft. SkyDemon will use this information to populate the official flight plan form that will be in turn disseminated to the relevant bodies and authorities. It's worth buying a few flight plan credits for SkyDemon. They're relatively inexpensive and save a great deal of time and stress. When you're plotting a route, you should try and use official visual reporting points or ICAO-recognized airfields. You can use other landmarks if you want, but this can result in your flight plan being returned, or you may receive a request for clarification before it's even processed. This may lead to unwanted delays of your flight. When route planning, you should also try to ensure that you include recognized waypoints at FIR boundaries and at roughly 30-minute intervals along that route. Anecdotally, this also appears to reduce the risk of your flight plan being challenged and/or rejected. Check that the altitudes or flight levels that you're using are appropriate for the direction of travel. Pilots in some parts of Europe adhere to these conventions much more strictly than we tend to in the UK, or perhaps I'm just speaking for myself. Submit your flight plan through SkyDemon up to 120 hours before departure, but not less than 1 hour before. Remember to activate it either by telephone or through the Air Traffic Service Unit when you depart. Finally, keep in mind that in Europe you must close your flight plan either by telephone or through the ATSU. Failure to close a flight plan in Europe may see you landed with colossal bills from search and rescue, who went out looking for you in the sea whilst you were sat outside a cafe drinking coffee and eating a croissant. You have been warned. So now we've taken care of the common requirements, let's go back to the 5 routing options and consider additional country-specific requirements for those of us flying UK-registered microlight aircraft, starting with France. If your aircraft meets the French definition of a ULM, which means that it has a maximum takeoff weight of around 500 kilograms or less and a power output not exceeding 170 horsepower, then you can fly in French airspace using your national private pilot's license and your pilot medical declaration without needing any additional permissions. If your aircraft does not meet these criteria, then you must apply for permission from the DSAC before entering French airspace. To do this, you will need to complete an LP6 form, attach copies of the appropriate supporting evidence, and pay the €50 processing fee. Furthermore, your pilot medical declaration will not meet the French requirements, so you will need to hold one of the aviation medical examiner issued medical certificates that corresponds to your license level. According to the BMAA, these are the combinations accepted by the French authorities. I chose to obtain a LAPL medical certificate myself, simply to keep the option of applying for French overflight open in the future. Don't worry, I'll put a link in the description to this and all the forms that I've mentioned in this video. If your application is approved, you may then be granted a maximum stay of 10 days at a time and no more than 3 visits within a 12-month period. After that, you'll need to apply again. In most cases, you'll need to notify French customs of your estimated time of arrival at least 2 hours in advance, although requirements will vary depending on which airfield you choose, so check in advance. I've also heard several reports that documentation and aircraft inspections with the French authorities can be more fastidious and protracted than other countries in Europe, although in fairness, most pilots report enjoying their overall experience of flying in France. If you find the French system a bit overwhelming, then I'm afraid things don't get better if you consider our second routing option of Belgium. For Belgium, you'll need to submit an application for a temporary permission to overfly Belgian territory. You must do this at least 10 days prior to your first intended flight. Although, once again, I would always suggest that you do not leave this until the 11th hour. This form is available from the FPS Mobility and Transport section of the Belgian Civil Aviation Authority website. As with the French application, you will be required to attach copies of supporting evidence to your application and pay the processing fee, this time of €125. If your application for your recreational flight is approved, Belgium will issue a temporary overflight permission that remains valid for 1 year. Within that year, you can plan your flights at your convenience, although you are limited to a maximum of 30 days of flying within Belgian airspace. After that period, you will need to apply again. When I first started planning my flights through Europe, I found the Belgian airspace particularly daunting, to put it mildly. Out of all the countries I looked at, Belgium appeared by quite some margin to be the most complex and cluttered. However, the more experience I gained of flying in Europe, the more I realised that things are not always as difficult as they appear on the chart. Once you understand the rules, prepare properly, and become accustomed to how each country operates, Belgium becomes just another part of a thoroughly enjoyable European adventure. Having said that, given that this would be my first experience of flying in Europe, I chose what appeared to be the far less challenging option of routing through the Netherlands. It was simply the best way to reduce my workload, the paperwork, and keep the stress to a minimum. Although there are certain areas of Dutch airspace that you cannot enter, there are still plenty of routing options available. When I flew across the entire country from east to west, I only needed to speak to ATC a handful of times, and several of those calls were simply for my own reassurance rather than out of necessity. At the time of writing, I'm not aware of any specific overflight forms required for the Netherlands. In my case, the simplicity of navigating the Dutch airspace and their systems far outweighed the few extra minutes I would need to spend flying over water compared with routing through and dealing with France or Belgium. For the Netherlands, you'll need to create an account on GenDec.eu and then submit a GAR to them in much the same way as you would in the UK. Their form and requirements are very similar to ours, which helps keep everything nice and straightforward. Set up your account at least 2 weeks in advance of your intended flight, as it may take a while for your account to be approved, and keep these details to hand. I saved the website link on my desktop screen of my iPad for easy access. For reasons of safety, good airmanship, and simple respect for the Dutch system, it is well worth familiarising yourself with their VFR flight rules. Your routing should reflect altitudes or flight levels that align with their protocols. The full list of VFR flight rules is available online. The 2 rules I burnt into my mind were, firstly, remain clear of the Schiphol TMA, and secondly, when flying above 3,000 feet, use odd thousands of feet when heading in an easterly direction, and even thousands of feet when heading in a westerly direction. This is obviously my oversimplification of the semicircular rule. In common with France and Belgium, pilots of microlight aircraft with a maximum takeoff weight of below 600 kilograms must submit an application to the Danish Civil Aviation and Railway Authority if they wish to operate in Danish airspace. This is completed online, and I have included a link to the form in the description box. As with France and Belgium, there is a processing fee, which at the time of writing is the equivalent of around €140. You will also be asked to upload PDF document copies of your supporting documents when you apply. These are the same documents that I recommended you keep organised in your 2 folders. The permission is also time limited and cannot exceed a total of 90 days. It probably goes without saying, but you should complete the application very carefully and accurately. Any errors can result in delays, denials, or the loss of your processing fee, so it's worth taking your time and doing it properly. Flying in Norwegian airspace will also require you to submit a request. If permission is granted, it will be limited to 30 days within a 12-month period. They urge visiting pilots to familiarise themselves with their VFR guidelines for Norway. I've explored the Norwegian CAA's website but cannot find an online portal for applications, so I suspect it may be necessary to do this by email. I've put links to their website, VFR guide and email address in the description box for this video. I don't think I would ever be brave enough to follow in my friend Sam's footsteps and fly directly from the UK to Norway over the North Sea. People always say to me that the aircraft doesn't know whether it's over land or sea. My problem isn't being in the air, it's the idea of ending up in the sea. So with that in mind, let's talk about what you should be carrying with you on a flight to Europe, aside from your documents. Interestingly, some countries in Europe have mandatory requirements for specific equipment that either you and/or your aircraft must carry before you're allowed to operate in their airspace. When I was researching this, I discovered several companies that will hire out emergency equipment such as life rafts, life jackets, and immersion dry suits. This is ideal for pilots who make only occasional trips to Europe because it means that you have access to the very best and most current equipment at a fraction of the purchase price. The minimum requirements for flying in Europe are for you to carry paper aeronautical charts covering your entire intended routing, an aviation band transceiver, and if possible a second backup or handheld unit, a transponder, life jackets for all persons on board, donned before departure for any leg over water, a personal locator beacon and/or an emergency locator transmitter. Your personal locator beacon and/or your emergency locator transmitter will generally need to be registered, and the manufacturer of the equipment usually provides details on how to do this. Again, make sure this is done well in advance, as it may take some time to complete the registration process. You should also consider, or may be required to have with you, high-vi vests for your destination airfields, an approved ballistic recovery system fitted, an immersion dry suit and/or self-inflatable life raft, water-resistant strobe torch, and whistles. Other useful items to remember are aviation headsets with fresh batteries, mobile phone and your tablet, chargers, sunglasses, spare glasses, sick bags which you can also use to pee in, a tie-down kit, a canopy cover, and a list of useful telephone numbers, especially for flight plan activation and deactivation. With all of this on board, you must ensure that you do your weight and balance calculations correctly, and if possible, get someone to check your calculations. I suspect that you and/or your passenger may also want to pack some spare clothes and toiletries too. For those of you who live in the countryside, before leaving home, make sure to check your jacket pockets and leave your pen knife and shotgun cartridges in your safe at home. If you're flying a UK registered 600 kilogram maximum takeoff weight aircraft, chances are you'll be sitting behind a Rotax engine. These engines can run on both Mogas and 100 low lead, but personally I would never dream of poisoning my precious 912 IS with 100 low lead unless it was a genuine emergency. Fortunately, the British Microlight Aircraft Association website includes an incredibly useful map showing all the airfields in and around Germany and parts of Europe where Mogas is available, which makes planning your fuel stops much easier. Paying for fuel can sometimes be more complex than finding it, and you should check with your destination airfield to see what payment types they will accept. The common methods for payment in Europe are payment using the AirOps phone app, aviation payment cards such as Total Energies, Air BP or Shell Fuel and Fly, debit and credit cards, and cash. In my experience, Europe has a much better infrastructure for general aviation, and I was genuinely impressed by how easy it was to cover long distances and quickly find places to land with good facilities, support and accommodation close by. I've received quite a few messages asking me about my preferred routing from the UK into Germany. This is the route that I used, and it worked very well for me, although I'm certainly not claiming that this is the best option. I'm sure that there are much better ways to do it, and if you have one, then please share it in the comments section. So is it easy to fly to Europe? Well, that's really a matter of perspective. It's a bit like being asked whether it's easy to fly an airplane. If you're well prepared, then the answer is probably yes. And just like flying itself, your confidence grows with experience. A more useful question might be, is it enjoyable flying to Europe? And the answer to that is absolutely. You will love it. Which brings us full circle to our viewer's comment. There is an old saying that familiarity breeds contempt. When we do something often enough, we can become blind to the details that once demanded our full attention. It's dangerous to assume that we are masters of a process simply because it feels familiar. The Dunning-Kruger effect, confirmation bias, complacency, or worse still, simple arrogance can lead us to believe that we understand a system in its entirety, when in reality we only have experience of a small proportion of a complete picture. As pilots, it's vital that we stay humble, curious and open to learning. We do our research, engage in training and share experiences. When we approach new challenges with that mindset, whether it's flying into Europe for the first time or stepping into an unfamiliar aircraft, the task becomes not only manageable but genuinely rewarding and enjoyable. So that brings us to the end of today's video. If you found this helpful or it has given you the confidence to start planning your own trip across Europe, then please let me know and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel and gives me an indication of the kind of content you find useful. If you have any questions or experiences of your own you'd like to share, then please do so in the comments section. Thanks for watching, And as always, fly safe and join us on our next little adventure.